My Lords, we now come to the fourth oral question. Lord Scriven.
I beg leave to ask the question standing in my name on the order paper.
My Lords, in our nation's time of need, we have been very fortunate to call on the talents of many, including some colleagues, old and new, some paid and some unpaid. Appointments are considered on merit, and when required, we ask candidates to declare their any interests. We assess these on a case-by-case basis, but declaring an interest is not always a barrier to being appointed. There are, however, robust processes in place to manage any conflict. These ensure no one gains unfairly from advising the government.
I call Lord Scriven.
My Lords, can the Noble Lord the Minister give a logical reason why a company introduced by a special advisor with no history in supplying PPE can be passed from a Minister's office, be fast-tracked and be 10 times more successful in getting a contract to supply PPE, sometimes not be able to use because it doesn't meet standards, than a company with a solid track record of supplying PPE that has no access to a special advisor or minister?
Well, my Lords, we are enormously grateful for the very, very many people who stepped forward to offer help during this time. When the Prime Minister made his public call for help, 16,500 people contacted us with various offers, and it was, of course, necessary to triage and prioritise that huge list. And in that list, there were a great many people who had extensive experience in their area. There were people who were new to the game. There were have-a-go heroes. There were multinational companies. And, my Lords, there were also those whose intentions were not as pure as one would hope. My Lords, we approached each and every on their merit. There was an official guidelines in order to guide the procurement processes, and we stuck to those guidelines every step of the way.
Call Lord Harris of Haringey.
Yesterday, the Noble Lord the Minister said that he had personally made 300 calls to potential suppliers of PPE earlier this year. Not surprisingly, given the report from the National Audit Office today, which the Daily Mail described as devastating, he didn't tell us how the lucky recipients of all his calls were chosen. Could the Noble Lord tell us whether one of those calls was to the jewellery designer Michael Sager, based in Miami, who received more than £200 million in contracts from the Noble Lord's department, paying £21 million to a Spanish fixer? And how did Mr. Sager and his jewellery come to the attention of the department? And why were major British companies with well-established global supply chains who offered to help ignored?
Well, my Lord, I'm grateful to the Noble Lord for referring to my calls. It would have been a lot more than 300 calls that I made during that time, because they were extremely difficult times. And I would remind him that in the NAO report, it does say that we found that ministers had properly declared their interests, and we found no evidence of their involvement in procurement decisions or contract management. My Lords, ministers weren't involved in procurement decisions. They facilitated the introduction of potential suppliers at a time when there was a massive global crisis, when supplies to this country were being abducted by other countries, where supply chains had broken down, where the Channel Tunnel was constrained, where the Indian transport system had ground to a halt, where presidents were literally diverting planes in the air with supplies meant for one country and grabbing them for their own. In those kinds of circumstances, ministers and their advisers intervened to get the right supplies to the front line to help those seeking PPE equipment. Those were extremely energetic efforts. I'm extremely proud of that work, and procurement decisions were left to the civil servants.
Call Baroness Jolly.
My Lords, ministers have many opportunities to meet a wide range of individuals and organisations in the course of their work, and they have to declare their interests. Is it the department's HR department or their ministers who are responsible for ensuring that SPADs understand both their role and their boundaries, and that they stay within them?
Well, my Lords, there is a very clear code for special advisers. They have line management through the Secretary of State and off and on to Downing Street. The role of SPADs during the pandemic has been exceptional. I would pay tribute to the large number of SPADs who made a huge difference, and I'm very proud of the work that they have done.
Lord Roebuck.
My Lords, I have certain sense of déjà vu, since this is almost exactly the same question as was asked yesterday. So I try not to be repetitive. I know my noble friend, with me, is grateful to those who came forward and freely, pro bono, gave their time, expertise and experience to assist in this terrible crisis. I know he will also, with me, share the view that some people are grubbing around looking for any dirt they can sling which will deter good public-spirited people from coming forward in future. But I have one specific question. Could you tell me how long, typically, a procurement process would last if you're looking to get PPE through the civil service procurement procedures?
Well, my Lord, my noble friend makes a very good point. I can't tell him how long it would typically take, but I can tell him that if everything went as smoothly as possible, 25 days is the absolute minimum that a procurement process could possibly take. That is why on March the 18th, new guidelines for procurement were put into place. The PPE team converted those into a very diligent 8-step process. The NAO have paid tribute to the effectiveness of that 8-step process. We put in place exactly the kind of reasonable processes necessary to respond to a pandemic like this, and the effect has been the purchase of billions of items of PPE to protect those on the front line of our healthcare.
I call Lord Berkeley and Knighton.
My Lords, I don't discount the many problems the Noble Lord the Minister has talked about, but the displeasure and even disgust of the public often arises as a result of something like the National Audit Commission uncovering information reactively. What we need is a more proactive look out for these problems, either in the Cabinet or the Cabinet Office. And if the Noble Lord the Minister says it's there, then I would suggest the National Audit Office is saying that it doesn't work very well.
Well, my Lords, I'm not sure if that is what the National Audit Office have said. They have very reasonably lighted on the importance of transparency and of the declaration of interests. Those are values that any reasonable minister or public servant would subscribe to. And the Cabinet Office itself has played a very energetic role during the entire pandemic, providing the systems, the support and the people and the contract staff in order to make sure that those values are upheld.
Baroness Thornton.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just say to the Noble Lord, Lord Robotham, that we supported the government in having the emergency powers to allow them to act quickly. But it's also important, even if people are giving their services for free, that they are held properly accountable. And it's rare to be able to return to a question that I felt was unanswered yesterday, when I asked the Noble Lord the Minister if George Pascoe Watson, the chair of the lobbying company Portland Communications, had signed a confidentiality agreement upon his appointment as a ministerial advisor. I would be grateful if the Noble Lord the Minister could specifically answer that question. Did George Pascoe Watson sign a confidentiality agreement when he was appointed? And presumably that's on the public record. Could the Noble Lord the Minister also inform the House if he or any of his officials have had any contact by any means of communication with Mr Pascoe Watson or anyone else at Portland Communications since the Sunday Times published its story online on Saturday evening?
Well, my Lords, the very, very large number of advisors, both paid and unpaid, were all processed by both the department, and their paperwork was then handed on to the Cabinet Office for approval. George Pascoe Watson, as others, was sent both a declaration of interest form, which he filled in and is on record, and was sent a volunteers agreement. The volunteers agreement has the code, the Official Secrets Act, built into it, and therefore his work was covered by that.
Baroness Smith of Newnham.
My Lords, could the Minister tell the House whether the government's anti-corruption champion, Mr John Penrose MP, has been involved in looking at any conflict of interests, or is he himself in danger of having a conflict of interest?
I'm not aware of him being involved in the work the Noble Baroness refers to.
I call Lord MP.
My Lords, does my noble friend not accept that the arrival of battalions of advisors, both paid and unpaid, causes confusion within departments as to the chain of command? And would he also agree with me that as a general principle in the civil service, the arrival of so many advisors downgrades the role of the Permanent Secretary as the principal advisor to the Secretary of State?
Well, Noble Lord asked a reasonable question about the management of staff in an epidemic like this, and he is right that these were extremely confusing times that put a huge amount of pressure on civil servants and all those who are making a contribution to our response. I'm enormously grateful to civil servants, in particular to Sir Chris Wormold, our Permanent Secretary, who played an absolute blinder and is one of the top civil servants of his class, and we are enormously grateful for his work, and to David Williams, the second Permanent Secretary of our department, both of whom were absolutely fantastic. I'm enormously grateful, though, to all those who stepped forward, not just at a senior level, but from Noble Lords to who worked with us, and to people who worked at all levels of our response. It made a huge impact. My Lords, I think that the arrival of military advisors, consultants, volunteers, business advisors lifted the spirits of the whole organisation and brought with it networks, expertise and energy in a way that saw a huge amount of collaboration. And when I hear a debate like this, I just don't recognise, from the tone that is sometimes represented in this chamber, the incredible spirit of energy and collaboration that characterised our response to the pandemic, something that I can't help repeating myself, something that I am extremely proud of.
My Lords, the time allowed for this question has elapsed, and I apologise to the three Noble Lords who are unable to ask their supplementary questions.
My Lords, I beg to move that the House do now adjourn until 1 p.m.
The question is that the House do now adjourn until 1 p.m. for questions on the answer to an urgent question on proposed parliamentary scrutiny of continuity trade agreements. As many as are of that opinion shall say content. Contrary not content, the contents have it.